Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be in such a place where everyone has got ties and suits on to talk about technology and about prediction forecasting technology that I am responsible for, and that's what we're going to do. 2 years ago, when Amos Yadlin was appointed as the director of the INSS, I approached him and I asked him what other wild request, outrageous request, that's for the simultaneous interpreting. He said, could we use long-term technological forecasting or prediction? It's not necessarily something that is totally understood. How can you use this kind of prediction, technological prediction and forecasting? How can one use it? And despite that, it is tempting enough, because anyone who does talk about the consolidation of policy tries to look ahead. And if anyone claims that that kind of prediction enables people to look 20 years ahead and use that knowledge in order to consolidate policy of today, then that should be tempting enough in order to generate a kind of a sampling program that we're going to talk about this evening, which is being run by Dr. Liran Amtebi from the Tel Aviv University and Professor Neubauer, who's also organizing this entire evening. And it was carried out with the participation of the department with Dr. Aaron Hauptmann and Dr. David Asig from Tel Aviv University, and Dr. Aaron Asig, from Bar-Ilan University. We have talked about various aspects that I would like to discuss here. Two of the people that I had the privilege of being their pupil, their student. I was a pretty bad student, by the way, if we're talking about the theory of game, the game and the play theory, as Professor Uman. I hope that I was a better with the theory of economics with Professor Tischler, but I will present him in a moment and introduce him. The claim that we claimed, if it can be said in a more tempting way, is if we can use that kind of technological forecasting or prediction, but in order to take that kind of thing and use it as it really is, and no one other than our research institute did that before, and we will choose a specific topic. And the topic that we're going to choose is how should Israel prepare itself for the use of a plethora of unmanned tools, vehicles, and means. But at the beginning of our path was how to do it. In other words, if we're talking about this kind of prediction, and then consolidate policy based on that. And truthfully, the how is still being consolidated at the moment. We're still trying to crystallize that whole idea. The program was divided into 3 parts. The first phase was the technological prediction. I'm going to say very little about that in order to give a feeling about what really was done there. And then there was a consolidation of recommendations for policy, which we're going to actually present in the next few months. And between the various phases, there was an internal phase of the consolidation of the actual products that we had actually sort of derived and produced. There was another claim that needs to be proven, and I brought that, I sort of borrowed it from another field of science to a world that isn't really natural sciences, but it does connect to it, but there isn't actually a significant technology forecasting, it's not as yet, it hasn't actually been coined and defined. We'll take a topic, a complex, widespread one, and we will subsection it. In other words, unmanned tools and weaponry. And each one had a research carried out about that, each specific one. And the whole idea is that if each one was delved into very deeply, then we could then aggregate them all at the end. So this actual process of the technological prediction or forecasting, as done at Tel Aviv University, through that we could perhaps show through supra-conclusions. Some of those may seem to be totally understandable. The first claim was that for military campaigns, for most military campaigns and tasks, one should be able to plan things 20 years in advance autonomously. And I asked Professor Uman what he thought about that, and Professor Uman, the Nobel Prize laureate, and I hope that I'm quoting correctly, that if I direct it to the human behavioral spectrum, then it'll be correct. And that is exactly my intention. In other words, an autonomous system, and I haven't got the time here to explain it, then you can actually predict it. And you can also have those executive capabilities as well that will also be autonomous. And even more so, it'll be sevenfold more correct if you're talking about economics and in other fields as well, that they could be done and predicted autonomously. And in addition to that, that so many of the tasks will be carried out in a group of objects or tools that will be built for that sake, which we will call individuals and groups. And the second phase, there was a deliberation, there was a discussion wherein we collected experts, each in their field, that actually covered the entire field, about 30 participants, and they covered the entire thing like that was the sort of opening shot. And we asked them the general questions. What does this do to the state, to the country? What does it do to us? And what kind of conclusions can we conclude, can we deduce from that in hindsight about our policy today? In other words, what we want to do is think about the policy for 20 years ahead and derive from that what would be relevant for nowadays. In other words, we're thinking about legal, social, economic issues. But there was a slight qualification to that. The program was planned as something that we would just actually, we just wanted in order to sample it, because we wanted to have some kind of research focus that would be rolling over permanently, in order to show just something that would be realistic, that would be viable, that this something might actually be something that we could implement, a kind of added value, so that we would be able to just demonstrate in some way, and we would be able to look 20 years ahead. And so many topics came up that truly touch upon the core and the pith of technology nowadays. And perhaps the greatest of all was the question of awareness, artificial awareness. In other words, we're talking about artificial intelligence that will be able to develop and that everyone will be able to understand. We're talking about very sort of thin ice that one has to be very cautious with. But what is autonomy? And there's so many other things that I cannot touch upon at this moment. And inter alia, out of all these things that we collected, we touched upon all sorts of aspects of society and ethics and economics. And do we want autonomous systems that people, human beings, would have taken upon themselves? And will they actually be able to actually fire in order to kill? In other words, are we letting machines and tools and systems do that instead of us? And it was obvious to all of us that there are two very strong aspects underlying all this. First of all, that it has to be a very swift process. We've already seen an affluence, an abundance of robotic systems with actual buds of use to be used at home already nowadays. Robotics we're talking about. And the second thing, it should be economic clout that would be generating this whole process. And vis-a-vis this, we did not deal in our research. Once every 2 months I met with Professor Kishner and I consulted with him behind the scenes, and I've asked him actually separately to expand on that this evening. And the second question that came up was that can we, as a state, recommend that this actually be carried out? Because should we be in that process, it's going to happen anyway. Should the state of Israel, with all due respect to ourselves, it will not by itself lead to this process. Israel will be within it. They can perhaps choose certain niches that they will be involved in, but they won't be able to spearhead it. And so should Israel actually be involved in that, the government? So for that discussion, we separated all those products to 3 levels: direct recommendations, interpretive recommendations, things that we have run the actual research, what we have interpreted these, and inter alia we are going to recommend. Professor Uman will relate to, by the way. The rest will be things that will be as a kind of recommendation for ongoing research. In other words, should systems decrease the motivation for war per se? I'm going to sort of briefly go over those 20 direct recommendations that, with some kind of diverse topic, a diversity of topics. Well, first of all, this autonomy and the execution of it, etc., it will be easiest to permeate it into the world of Intel 20 years ahead, for example. 20 years ahead, one will be able to see a completely different world of Intel that will control, by the way, because that situation, by the way, already exists and is nowadays, and it is actually not that unacceptable nowadays, but I think it will be even reinforced. And this kind of system will give us intel about any place in the world at any given time. The second thing is that we need to build concepts. I think that what limits us is the concept of it and not the technology. Anyone who has actually developed technology for military uses have always looked at the world, either one led the other, or the other way, or vice versa. It was led by the technology or what it was. In other words, the whole concept will actually limit the technology. And the same with the actual doctrine of warfare. There's another element that we have to relate to. I mean, you can see that, over the last few months, people have spoken about in the media about robots who are taking work away from human beings. In other words, in developed countries, they are taking over, replacing people.
מתוך ההמלצות הפרשניות, אנחנו אומרים, הדבר הזה ישפיע השפעה מרחיקת לכת על נושא פרופיל השירות בצבא, והפרופסור טישלר ירחיב על נושא הזה. אנחנו מדברים על הצורך לנהל את התהליך הזה מלמעלה. המדינה צריכה לפי המלצתנו אליה לראות את התהליך הזה, 20 שנה קדימה, לראות אותו על כל היקפו, ולהחליט שהיא מנהלת אותו. לא נותנת לו לצמוח מלמטה, אלא מקימה את הגופים המתאימים לניהול כזה תהליך, שנוגע בהכשרת כוח אדם, שנוגע בשיתוף פעולה בינלאומי מאוד מאוד נרחב במגוון גדול מאוד של תחומים, שעוסק בשאלות בסיסיות שקשורות באתיקה, משפט וכלכלה. ובתוך הנושאים שאנחנו הגדרנו אותם כשאלות למחקרי המשך, אמרנו, הדבר הזה נותן עוד דבר שצריך לשים עליו זרקור. היכולת להפעיל כוח. היתרון היחסי, המושג שנקרא יתרון יחסי, עומד לעבור שינוי. וצריך לתת תשומת לב גדולה לכך שמדינות יכולות להיות פחות ופחות בעלות המונופול על הפעלה על כוח, וזה מצב שקיים גם היום. ולכן הצורך לשיתוף פעולה בינלאומי הוא גדול מאוד. הדבר השלישי והאחרון, שאנחנו חוזרים ואומרים, ההשפעות ארוכות הטווח על הכלכלה הן מפליגות. ולסיום, אנחנו רואים פה מצד שמאל, את העקומה של חוק מור המפורסם, שנשאר בתוקף כבר עשרות שנים, ומראה את העלייה בכוחו של המחשוב עם הזמן. והעלייה הזאת, זה הפריצת דרך הראשונה לעולם של חיזוי טכנולוגי. נשארה בתוקף. אנחנו יודעים לאן נגיע. ואנחנו אומרים כאן, יש פה איזושהי נקודה שאפשר לצאת ממנה לדרך. אנחנו יודעים לאן נגיע וצריך להיערך לכך מראש. תודה רבה.